Welcome back to our study of the book of Revelation. We are eager to explore the seventh seal, or the final day in the probationary week of planet Earth. Chronologically, the seventh seal should have opened in the autumn of 2001 AD. Mathematically, it should have happened around the second week of September of that year. If that is true, we are living in the seventh seal right now. So, how would we know? And where is the Lord? Well, let's take this feast together.
All of the seals have been opened with a noise. A shout, a quake, a lament. The seventh seal is different. It opens with
And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour.
silence. Why? First of all, silence can only be juxtaposed with noise. The best silence can only happen after a very noisy event. I am going to offer, by way of speculation, that the noise heard round the world on September 11th, 2001, was the closing of the sixth seal. The great prophet-poet Isaiah may have had this exact event in mind when he foresaw
Isaiah 33:18. Thine heart shall meditate terror. Where is the scribe? Where is the receiver? Where is he that counted the towers?
At the following General Conference of the Church, just weeks later, our prophet, President Gordon B. Hinckley, opened the conference by saying, "The vision of Joel has been fulfilled." Since the vision of Joel was a recapitulation of the sixth seal, it is logical to assume that the prophet was saying that we had lived to witness the opening of the seventh seal. How would we know? The very sign of the seal's opening was silence. Except for a great noise, due to the half hour of silence, the 6,000-year block would close and the seventh would open, but it would appear to men as if nothing had occurred in terms of heaven. For wise men on earth, this additional period of time is a gift of mercy. Any time the Lord extends his judgment is a time for us to repent and improve. It is a time to lay up more treasures in heaven through good works on earth, and thereby present to God a much better resume. The sheer number of new temples and young missionaries serving speaks with gratitude to God for the extra time we have been allotted. A half hour of heavenly time equals approximately 21 years earth time. During this brief silence on earth, heaven is getting busy.
And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given to him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer, and filled it with fire of the altar, and cast it into the earth. And there were voices, and thunderings, and lightnings, and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound.
Please note that this is the same altar upon which all of the blood of the righteous church has been shed. This image is saying that righteous judgment is coming, judgment that the world deserves for what it has done to Christ's first church when it was offered freely by Christ himself and then by his chosen 12, 70, and the saints of the former days. At the end of the half hour of silence, voices, thunderings, lightnings, and a great earthquake will signal the end of silence. If our speculation is right, and we could be wrong, we should expect nature to slowly start getting stranger after the fall of 2022. Either way, once it does begin, It will be woe upon woe. The Lord called this period the testimony of nature, when missionary work would end and nature, including the hosts of heaven, would preach instead. With the preparations ready, the Lord will, in a sense, unmake the world. Here is the first trumpet.
The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. And they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up.
God made the earth in 7 days, 6 to work and 1 to rest. Here we see him pull the world apart with 7 blasts of the trumpet. The first call to arms kills 1/3 of Earth's foliage, and apparently all the grass. The message is, get your food storage sorted out.
And the second angel sounded. And as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed.
The second trumpet sounds. Something like a mountainous comet hits the seas. It kills 1/3 of the life in the ocean, as well as devastates the navies and merchant ships of all nations. Joseph Smith taught that a comet, or something like it, would hail the return of the lost 10 tribes, as well as the city of Enoch. It is possible that this event is also their return.
And the third angel sounded. And there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters, because they were made bitter.
The third trumpet sounds, and this time the comet does strike the fresh water of the planet. This burning star has a name. Wormwood. If you want to experience a truly nasty bitterness, you can go to a health food store and buy a tincture made from the herb wormwood. It is used to kill intestinal worms. I tried it once. Let's just say that now I can eat raw lemons without an issue. Once you have tasted the bitterness of wormwood, lemons are delicious. Most biblical scholars agree that the burning comet is not covered in wormwood, but rather that its effect is something like the herb. It is fascinating to note that scientists have discovered large amounts of cyanogen in the tails of comets. Apparently, Halley's Comet contains enough cyanogen in its tail to poison a continent, except that Earth's dense atmosphere protects us from it. The comet wormwood is different. It hits us head on. Men have to drink water to live, and so this woe is disastrous to human life.
And the fourth angel sounded. And the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened. And the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise.
With the blast of the fourth trumpet, the sun is injured in some manner. 1/3 of the moon and stars are also wounded. This apparently alters the number of daylight hours by 1/3 and deeply darkens the night too. Assuming for argument's sake 12 hours of daylight to 12 hours of night, this woe brings us only 8 hours of daylight and 16 hours of night. 4 of these to be exceptionally darker and oppressive, we are told. With death and darkness all around us, a horrible cry is heard.
And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels, which are yet to sound.
There is no word for very in the ancient tongue. If you want to say something is going to bring very much woe, you simply repeat the woes. This time there are 3, so it's going to be bad. the first woe.
Revelation chapter 9, verse 1. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man.
There has been a lot of speculation about these creatures that bring the first woe upon humanity. We must admit from the start that none of the answers are completely satisfying. There is evidence to suggest that they might be a supernatural demonic horde, a modern human army, or a swarm of nature. Let's discuss each in turn. Let's start with the demonic horde. We know that a star falls to earth from heaven. A star is a point of light. In restored Christian thinking, it is telestial light or glory that is neither paradisical nor celestial. This fallen light in Hebrew is pronounced hell, 1L. We would say Lucifer in Latin. In Greek, his name means the morning star. He is given the key to open the pit. He has no power to do it until it is given to him. In other words, his bounds are set. Hell has been called a bottomless pit since it is the lowest point one can fall. Any movement out of the pit, therefore, can only be up. You can't fall any lower than a pit without a bottom. Once the pit is opened, a filthy darkness rises out. It dims the already injured sun and oppresses the very air. It is followed by the indescribable demon locusts. John does his best to describe them, but in the end he settles on telling more about what they do. They are like scorpions in that they go wherever they like and inflict woe and pain on everyone in their way. Again, we are told the incomprehensible. These are locusts that don't hurt grass or trees, only human beings. More specifically, they only hurt those who have not been sealed with the gift of God. The difficulty with it all arises from the next verse. What do you make of this?
And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them.
I had an uncle who contracted the West Nile virus years ago and lived through it. I asked him about it, and he said, I wanted to die but didn't. If I could have died, I would have. All from a tiny insect bite? I have never been so sick that I welcomed death, but he has. Still, has there ever been a time on earth when men wanted to die but were unable to? It does rather make you think of demonic possession, not unlike the demoniac man whom Jesus cast legion out of. It would make sense that these would have access to and attack those who have not been sealed by God. The demoniac wanted to die, but was unable to. But this gets even stranger as we continue. And this leads us to the theory that we are dealing with a modern human army in full battle array. What do you make of this?
And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months.
I remember being in the 3rd grade, public school, when an assembly was called in the lunchroom gymnasium. The speaker was a local TV weatherman who was the closest thing I knew then to a celebrity. I chuckle today at his brazenness. He was supposed to give a lecture on science and the weather, but instead spoke on these verses. It is my first memory of pondering on the ponderous. Today, I doubt that even the Golden Rule is mentioned in public school. So much for In God We Trust. The weatherman's explanation was that these creatures were Arabian F-16 fighter pilots. Reread the description above again. It does kind of work. You will see the men in their cockpits covered in expensive modern gear. The idea of a modern army of locusts is strengthened by 4 additional words found only in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, specifically the book of the prophet Amos.
Septuagint Amos 7, 1 and 2. Thus has the Lord God shewed me, and behold, a swarm of locusts coming from the east, and behold, one caterpillar, King Gog. And it came to pass, when he had finished devouring the grass of the land, that I said, Lord God, be merciful. Who shall raise up Jacob? For he is small of number.
The Septuagint is the only version of Amos which reads this way. No other version mentions Gog as being king of the locusts. Amos 7, 3-4 goes on to speak of the Lord punishing the oceans too, in ways that echo John. Unfortunately, the 4 versions of Amos found in the Dead Sea Scrolls are damaged in this area, and can give us no additional clue as to which version of Amos's locusts were originally intended. John, however, gives us a different name for the locust king. Apollyon, meaning the destroyer in Greek.
And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon.
And so we come to our last theory, which is actually the one that I have come to believe is the most likely. An insect swarm from nature. I addressed this and how it connects to Apollyon in a Q&A episode, episode 42, but that was over a year ago. So let's recap the pertinent parts of that before moving on. In chapter 9 of the book of Revelation, Apollyon is mentioned, and what's so interesting is once again, this particular being and sign is connected to the idea of stars falling from heaven. So the heavens. There's a term that the Lord uses. He calls himself the Lord of Sabaoth. In fact, the Sabaoth means Lord of the hosts of heaven, or the armies of heaven. Specifically, he's talking about the planets. What's so interesting? Let's just look at this in chapter 9 together. And so he says, And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as scorpions have power. There's been a lot of talk about what these creatures are that are coming out of the bottomless pit. A lot of people see them as demons. Personally, I think that they're insects. There's going to be swarms and attacks of these insects in such a manner that they are oppressive. I don't know if these are going to be the Asian hornets that we hear about, that are these enormous yellow jacket creatures with these terrible stingers that people say actually are incredibly frightening when they see them. They're enormous. I don't know if they're going to be some of these horrifically huge locusts that the ancients say used to plague us from time to time. But the part that becomes interesting is that their king is this being named Apollyon. The clue that we have is that his name in this case is Greek. We know Apollyon. He is Apollo, the great hot plasma star at the center of our solar system. Apollyon is the sun. Experts will tell you that temperatures and seasons affect insects dramatically. John tells us in his same apocalypse that the sun's hours and temperatures are going to change. This will affect all life on the planet, and that includes insects, the pests that until now we have kept under control. Remember the Lord's punishment of Egypt in the days of Moses, called the Old Kingdom. The ancients all feared the sun. They knew that at some point the sun was going to get angry. John says this. As you read Revelation, you will see that the sun gets angry and that life on earth begins to change and that the heat situation changes and the amount of hours of heat changes, and that has profound effects upon the earth, including the insects and the plants and man. The sun becomes oppressive. This is the meaning behind the great sun calendar that the Aztecs built in Mexico that was dug out some years ago. They believed that using their prophets and their scriptures, they could figure out when the sun was going to get angry. And they built caves in the earth to go into because they knew that when the sun gets angry, the only thing you can do is go underground.
And hide from it.
Yes. Be wary of the day when Apollyon gets mad. The ancients have always understood that the Lord was the Lord of Sabaoth, that by being able to control the planets, he was proving that he was God omnipotent. But we are feasters on the word, unafraid to speculate, but determined to hold fast to only revealed truth. We will just have to wait and see. Let's speculate gently for a moment. The prophet Ezekiel foretold an attack on Jerusalem, which appears to be an attack prior to the second coming. If this is true, it means that there will be two terrible attacks on the holy city. This makes some sense. All of the early Christian fathers taught that the Jews would rebuild Solomon's temple before the second coming. The Lord at his return is supposed to be ushered into the temple once he appears as Messiah. We've all heard the theory that the BYU Jerusalem Center would make an excellent temple for our Jewish brethren if needed, but I never saw how that made any sense. The Lord is very jealous about his land, his holiness, his word, and his bride. I do not see him compromising on any of this, so as not to offend others whom he has repeatedly warned over the past 4,000 years, that he will put his house, his palace, and his throne exactly where he wants to put it. Honestly, we can either get on board with him or go and join the goat herd. All of this means that some event will allow the Jews the freedom to rebuild the temple on land that the children of Esau currently claim for themselves. Ezekiel's war appears to suggest that a colossal nuclear defeat of the enemies of Israel will grant the Jews a period of time in which to do it. It also seems to be the case that some amazing protective event, like divine deliverance from a nuclear attack, will rally the Jewish people in faith to rebuild the temple. Again, we are speculating here, but the facts fit nicely. If two attacks are correct, it would also explain the second woe, which seems to be another attack after a short break. I have laid out the theories here because I wanted to sum up this plague with my opinion. I suspect that this woe has its answer in a gentle combination of all of these summations. The Lord has warned us that at a certain point he would withdraw his Spirit from the world, leaving only the gift of the Holy Ghost in its place. Latter-day Saints know that this gift can only be given by the laying on of hands by one having authority to do so. When the Lord withdraws his Spirit, here also called the light of Christ, the devil will then have full power over his own. I suspect that what we are seeing here in terms of demon locusts is in fact the human army of Gog, possessed by demon hordes, unleashed by Satan. I believe this is why men and women will be in a frenzy, longing to die, but also wanting to destroy. The demonic sons of perdition have no bodies, and never will have. This will be their only chance. Feelings of pleasure and pain, rage beyond measure, all of this focused through a stolen physical body. Once possessed with it, they will not easily let go. If this occurs at the same time when the sun becomes angry, and if the earth is reeling from terrible swarms of insects too, this would indeed be a terrible woe.
When I say woe, I mean woe!
If food has become scarcer due to natural plagues as well, war seems likely. But we are not finished yet. In sorrow, one of the three woes is past. Sadly, there are two more.
One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter.
The second woe.
Revelation chapter 9, verse 12.
The second woe contains some strange imagery.
And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men.
The angels bound in the Euphrates? This is not a simple image. John acts like he knows exactly who these are. You know, the angels bound in the Euphrates. But which Euphrates? The New World one or the Old World one? There is even talk of the heavenly one. If the heavenly Euphrates is meant, then John is here speaking about the Tessabim, or the planetary hosts of heaven. Modern man does not truly appreciate that the planets are alive and respond to the Lord's call to battle. There has been a heavenly Euphrates in the sky. We will explore this when we study Genesis together. For now know that this is a heavenly army. Note the number of soldiers.
And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them.
200 million has to be the largest army ever assembled for one earthly battle. Meteors and asteroids were considered heavenly horses by our ancestors. When the Lord spoke to Job about Mars, he used equestrian imagery, even comparing the hosts of heaven to an impetuous stallion in need of strong reins and a stern rider. These, screaming through the atmosphere, have been likened to lions with fiery gaping jaws. We have already stated that NASA has discovered a high concentration of cyanide gas in the burning tails of many of these flying astro hosts.
And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and of jacinth, and brimstone. And the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these 3 was the 3rd part of men killed, by the fire, and by the smoke, and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth, and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils, and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see, nor hear, nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts.
But note, men will still not stop their murders, sorceries, which means drugs, fornications, and thefts. What is God supposed to do with such people as this? How much more can mortal humans take and not acknowledge God's sovereignty and or repent? It is at this point in the experience that the vision stops for a moment. We are still in the grasps of the second woe and have the 3rd woe yet to come. We are not finished, not by a long shot, but we pause. It is here that John is called on a mission to be an Elias. An Elias calling is one of sowing seed for another to harvest. These calls always seem to be connected to Father Noah in some way. Just as Father Noah prepped the new earth so that another might harvest it later. We will come back to the last woe soon, but let's enjoy the break that's given. See if you can figure out who this angel is at the start of the chapter.
Okay, very interesting stuff. Scary, really, but also wonderful. It will be useful to understand these things now so that we will be less frightened when we see these things. It does sound like some of this will be signs that we will best understand when we actually see them. But since we are pausing here at John's design, let's recap what we've seen and touch on where we are headed, just to make sure we don't lose our way. We saw the seventh seal open, and there was a pause. None of the four guardians who block the way to the throne have roared or yelled or cried out nor bellowed. The word was not shouted either. There was silence in heaven. Since that had not happened before, it confused the whole world.
Yes, the Lord went into his temple to prepare himself for his day of vengeance. The Lord hates revenge. He prefers love and mercy. But he is a God who does what must be done. And there had been far too many outrages since the great flood, and it was time to end it.
Yes, even the angels and the spirits of the dead at the altar are starting to ask, "How much more of this can you take, Lord? This needs to end." When even your senior vice presidents are all saying, "Enough, enough, it's time for the CEO to act." So at last he gives his 7 angels their trumpets to call out the end.
7 is completeness.
I knew you were going to say that. I've been loving Eastern thinking, and it is starting to come into my mind almost automatically as I read now, just like you said it would.
Perfect. Doesn't it make the scriptures clearer?
For our listeners who may not understand what we are saying here, sacred numbers and how the Lord uses them to teach us is a great feast that you can find in the author's book, Zechariah and the Teachers of Righteousness. It's volume 4 in the Gospel Feast series, and it will broaden your mind, especially when it comes to Eastern thinking and understanding the scriptures like never before. It is worth a read.
There are 2 books that I believe John was leaning on as he crafted Revelation: Zechariah and Joshua. John knew the Old Testament as well as Paul did. It is further proof of his fine parents who taught him their culture, their laws, and the words of their prophets.
I can see that, but we need to get back from our tangent.
Culture is important in any people, and those who try and change a good culture are not necessarily our friends. It's rather like when King Solomon started listening to his progressive wives in his older years and began to alter the culture that the Lord had given them. When one becomes progressive, away from the culture that the Lord has given, one can't help but remember the old phrase, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." Love tangents.
Yes, we do. So the millennial year opens, and nothing happens for about 21 years, give or take. Then the Lord gives a trumpet to each of the 7 angels and commands them to announce his returning with both his reward and his punishment. The first angel sounds, announcing devastation of 1/3 of all the grass and trees on the earth, which is, of course, a disaster to the environment. Humanity has messed genetically with much of our environment, and so today there are many more health issues and allergies to food than God intended there to be. The second angel announces death to the oceans, and 1/3 of all sea life that lives in it dies. It also destroys the ships and navies of the world. Using your lessons in Eastern thinking, I can see that this is also a direct attack on Lucifer, as he is the head CEO of this fallen world. He is the king of the sea and has sworn to use commerce and human militaries to cause ruin with blood and horror.
All right. Yes, love that Eastern thinking.
Thank you. I'm feasting and understanding. Your books have really helped me do that. So now, the third angel announces a comet or asteroid hitting the earth and contaminating the fresh water, making it undrinkable for a time. This is, of course, also a disaster.
And who is symbolically our living water?
Okay, yes, Eastern thinking. Jesus Christ is our living water.
You got it. And right now he's giving us justice, not mercy. Justice can be very bitter unless one humbles themselves to the judge, acknowledges their sins and trespasses, and begs the court for mercy. This most of us won't do. But for those who will at this moment, there is still hope and protection, and the Lord is very quick to offer mercy. He died so that he could do that.
Now, the fourth angel announces a change in our planetary understanding. The sun, moon, and stars behave differently, which I imagine is going to be very frightening. This brings us to the fifth trumpet, where someone or something opens the bottomless pit, and we are under attack by demon zombie locusts, for lack of a better understanding. These only hurt those who have not been sealed in God's kingdom. This is also called the first of three woes upon humanity, directly. Humans are very rapidly running out of time now to change their fate.
I personally believe that this is the woe of the fifth trumpet, in which mankind will be grateful to have a garment of protection shielding them from the power of the destroyer. The ancients called the sun the great destroyer, because anything left out in the sun long enough, including your own skin, didn't last terribly long. This is a change from the days that Saturn ruled the sky, and the heavenly river of water protected us even more from cosmic radiation. The ancients were profoundly aware of this shift. We don't really see it today because we've been living under it so long.
There are two more trumpets to sound, but first we need to pause at the poem's center and enjoy the light of the center branch, the servant branch of the Lord's great menorah.
Great recap. Yes, this book really works like a menorah, which is probably why the Lord opened his vision with a menorah. In terms of God's instruction here, we have reached the center shaft of the menorah, and so, like a chiasmic poem, we have completed the A and B verses, and have now reached the middle C verses, and it's time to progress back out, gaining new insights that we are to put together with the previous ones in order to get the full meaning.
Yes, I can see why this is confusing for Western minds.
Yes, but hey, and to be Western, yee-haw, there is nothing stopping us from listening to this podcast again and again until it clicks. It wouldn't hurt you to grab your scriptures and read along and mark them up too. This does get easier if you start with a prayer and listen for your shepherd's voice as you read. This book has that blessing from the Lord's own mouth. He that reads it can gain a blessing, but you have to let him know that you are claiming that blessing. Believe me when I tell you, the Lord really loves it when you remind him of his word. He doesn't see it like we see it. He sees it that you know his word, and that pleases him a lot.
This has been another fantastic episode in the Gospel Feast series, and we're not even halfway through this incredible book. Since our audience keeps expanding, thank you to all who have shared this podcast with friends. We think it is wise to say again that if you are new to our series, it is important to know that these episodes build on each other. If this is your first feast with us, you should really consider starting with Season 1, Episode 1, and move up through the series. They, like the good news of Jesus Christ, have been freely given, so we will freely give. Enjoy the feast, that is, the Word of God. Even so,